of all, these are young people between the ages of 26 to 30. A composite picture is being compiled because they were seen by around 6 people. They saw them personally, and the main thing is they can identify them. The second question, which I could answer today without violating the confidentiality of the investigation, is that presumably the weapon which was used was a Browning-type handgun, and we know what types of bullets. What are the most probable versions of this murder? The basic version, which we're all working on right now, is that this was a murder in connection with his professional duties. Of very great interest are those documents which, as I've already said, were in the office and were in the briefcase and have a connection to the creation of the Board of Founders members itself. There is a letter from 10 advertising agencies where they, in our opinion, did not consider Listyev to be of their position, that he was of a different point of view. All of this, with specialists in this sphere, must be thoroughly analyzed. Specialists have also been involved for this, and we hope that in this area we'll find definite keys to solve this murder. Today, the Federal Service of Counterintelligence must do everything possible to find the criminals. I can officially state that today we've already created investigative groups which are in closest contact with other law enforcement organs, mostly the prosecutor and the Internal Affairs, and the main Department of Internal Affairs are conducting operations of investigation and search in order to find the suspects and to decide on motives. The leadership of the FSK has included most trained professional personnel in the group, especially since today almost all of our 79 territorial branches are involved, and military counterintelligence to clarify circumstances, no matter where, connected with the murder of Listyev. In your opinion, is there a principal difference between the murder of the journalist Dmitry Holodov and Listyev? There is a principal difference. Dima, as a brave journalist, touched on personal issues, and he was a threat for concrete individuals. But Listyev, I think he began to pose a threat to the system. Today, law enforcement organs assume responsibility for unsolved crimes, for unsolved murders, but at times I want to stand face-to-face to deputies and ask them one question: but what did you do during this time, so as to create that normative legal basis, those conditions in which law enforcement organs and the courts can effectively not just locate criminals, but punish them to the full extent of the law. I presume it's extremely necessary currently to adopt several normative and organizational measures to change the situation in the country. I feel that perhaps the need has ripened to isolate certain groups of people into a category of so-called subjects of heightened risk. I would currently include political figures, entrepreneurs, and to a certain degree journalists. I feel that those measures must be sufficiently decisive, primarily on a legislative basis, and I don't exclude the undertaking of certain urgent measures. At the meeting with the press and our television company, the president gave a strict assessment of the performance of the leadership of Moscow. Not excluded is that the brazen spread of crime was discussed at the meeting between Boris Yeltsin and Yuri Lushkov. It's not difficult to surmise they talked about Vlad Listyev, remembering that the prosecutor and the head of the city internal affairs of Moscow are appointed in agreement with the mayor of the capital. The head of the Russian government, Viktor Chernomyrdin, called the murder of Vlad Listyev piracy and promised that the government will not save any expense in order to defend the right of free speech from any encroachment. Viktor Stepanovich, yesterday our comrade died. This is a terrible grief for Ostankino, but in my opinion, it is as well a challenge to state power. The president is the chairman of the trustees' council of the television station. Deputy chairman is Ivan Rybkin. How do you assess what has happened?
First of all, I would like to express to you
the words of condolences toward the family and relatives and friends. We all knew him. This is truly a grief, and it's painful that the people have to endure and bear on their shoulders such burdens for the sake of changing Russia, the country. And yet there are base, underhanded elements which are attempting to foil this. They won't succeed. I agree with you that this is a challenge, not just to the authorities, but to everything we're doing, everything we are trying to conduct. It's a challenge to our policies, a challenge to reform. The object of the government and all law enforcement organs is to, first of all, find, get to the bottom of it, and bring to trial. Here, perhaps, it's not even necessary to give special instructions. Enough of those instructions. Aren't our losses great enough as it is? Therefore, I can answer for the government. Everything which is necessary and has to be done, the government will do. I think the Ministry of Internal Affairs and the leadership have already received instructions from the President, and this is then a matter of honor. Will you personally keep this matter under your control? Not just under my control, but everything which must be done by Russia and by me and by my colleagues. We will do everything. We must stop this flagrant spread. Our television company today received thousands of faxes and telegrams from official sources and from ordinary people with words of condolences and anger. Attitudes toward the barbaric murder of the head of the Russian public television were expressed by the State Duma and the Federative Council, the Patriarch Alexei, and the Constitutional Court, the World Organization of Writers, and the International Institution of the Press. Condolences arrived from residents of the village Farlovsk in the Vladimir district and from the workers of the Almaty manufacturing plant. Telegrams from villages and cities from Russia and the CIS countries have been arriving together with condolences from the embassies of Israel, Bulgaria, and other countries of the world. Expressing opinions also are representatives of Russian political parties and movements. There's no doubt that this was a murder for hire. The murder was planned by certain circles, and I personally, as an experienced politician for many years, am certain that behind this murder there are quite solid forces of a mafia leaning, undoubtedly. And if you ask me, why are these cases not being solved, I, in practice, know that these cases are solved within the first 3 to 5 days after the crime is committed. Everything depends on how the work will be organized, from the initial investigative measures. Today's situation in our country concerning the safety of the individual and society is an acute, glaring issue, and we must simply adopt such cardinal measures that have to be effective. Our law enforcement organs are not working out. We have already tabled and discussed and asked so many times, but we grow despondent. We don't know what to do. What law can we adopt? Maybe we should put these gangsters in front of a firing squad publicly. We'll demand, I'm certain, the resignation of the Minister of Internal Affairs, Yedin, the Director of the Federal Service of Counterintelligence, Stepashin, the resignation of Prosecutor General Ilyushenko. We will also demand the resignation of the heads of the law enforcement organs of Moscow. Why does an entire series of political murders remain unsolved? I see two reasons. Either it's a glaring, depressing incompetence of the heads of law enforcement, or this is the corruption of those who are delegated the solving of those murders. Since we're conducting the battle with crime, I simply don't count on any large success, and there will be no success until we undermine the criminal world's financial and economic basis. To chase criminals in the streets, and by doing so, as if deceiving ourselves. We think that we are resolving the battle with crime. That's empty and vain thinking. Today, the criminal world has colossal financial measures. Today, it costs nothing to hire a killer in Kamchatka, to transport him by private plane to Moscow or other regions to commit a murder and then send him back home. The criminal world sits on money. If we don't create order in this area, we won't heal the situation in Russia. Vlad Listyev probably did not strive to become an authority for politicians, but he did want to be loved by his viewers, those for whom he worked on the entire expanse of the former Soviet Union. Remember the words of Vysotsky, "I don't like violence or powerlessness." Does it seem to you that the murder of Dima Kholodov and now Vlad Listyev is first of all powerlessness of the authorities? No, I don't think so. I can't imagine that this gigantic army of highly professional, powerful overseers of law and order could not cope with this matter. That means two reasons remain. Either there are certain circumstances because of which they can't do it, or they simply don't want to do it, which I can imagine as well, because the worse for some, the better for others. I'm shocked now, not just by the fact that Vladislav is no longer, because without him, television, the television screen has now become an orphan. It was alive, and now everything that's alive for some reason falls immediately under knives or bullets. Pain and anger was the response in Armenia to the news of the base murder of Vladislav Listyev. In the multi-million voice choir of the national indignation, natural protests of the Armenian journalists is heard who are on strike today in Yerevan. We feel that these shots, which rang out in Moscow, were not at an individual but at freedom of speech. Our colleague was killed at that moment when, on the entire post-Soviet expanse, intimidation of journalists continues and illegal closures, as in our case of 14 editions of newspapers and agencies. We feel that now one of the greatest, the most dangerous professions is the profession of a journalist, either in Chechnya, Moscow, or Yerevan. We can't be intimidated by that. We will fight to the end. Ukrainian journalists today, together with their Russian colleagues, are astounded at the shamelessness with which the murder was committed. It's painful for us to even think that Vlad is dead. It's painful to the depth of our hearts, and it's such a shame that this could be. But fearful, it depends on what fear you mean. Fear for ourselves or for our colleagues? No, we don't have that fear. But it's fearful that we live and work in such a society where the price of the life of a talented journalist, an intellectual man, costs less than a moment of advertising in his very popular program. On one hand, it's a paradox. On the other hand, it's terrible. In order to change this, we must change the attitude in society to our work. Since morning, in the Bishkek core point of Ostankino, Kyrgyzstanian television is phoned by people with expressions of condolence and anger. They phoned from the distant Vyala Kursha in the Porsk district. They say Vladislav Listyev was from those parts and went to school there. There was no time to verify that information, but it's something else is for certain. Vladislav Listyev has become a relative and close person in every Kyrgyzstanian home. They're simply shooting at glasnost and at democracy. This is not the first time. And the most terrible thing is that they don't find the murderers. I'm absolutely doubtful that the murderers of Vladislav Listyev will be found. We grieve deeply on the repose of the brightest star of Ostankino. Since the very beginning, the program point of view of Vladislav Listьев was open and honest. He was paid back with a view through a target of a pistol. At the top hour, or rush hour, of his popularity, they forced him to be silent, hoping, evidently, with a shot in the back to frighten each one of us, for whom the only weapons were